I used to work as a cashier at a BP that was right off the interstate. It doubled as a truck stop and was open 24 hours. I had worked there for about a year, so I was fairly comfortable with the job, and I was used to working night shifts alone, despite being a smaller person. So I was working one night, and everything was going as usual. It was about 1 a.m., and I saw a pickup truck pull in. 3 passengers got out and entered the store. The 2 men were wearing camouflage outfits, and the woman was wearing jeans and a sweater. The men talked to the woman outside of the door before entering, and then they all went straight to me at the counter and asked for some cigarettes. As the one man was paying, the other one went to the other side of the store, looking at drinks. I looked at the woman and realized that she had a look of panic on her face. I immediately felt in my gut that something bad was going on. We made eye contact, and she mouthed the words, "Help me." Then, the man grabbed his cigarettes with one hand and the woman's arm with the other, and yelled at his buddy that they were ready to go. I was only 19 and wasn't really sure what to do, so I waited until they walked out the door and slid my hand under the counter and hit the panic button. About 5 to 10 minutes later, the cops got there and I told them what happened. They looked at the surveillance videos and told me that they were investigating a kidnapping with a description of that same vehicle. I told them which direction they went on the interstate, and the rest of the officers left after them while I gave my statement to the one who stayed behind. I never did find out if they caught them or not. In college, I would go home every other weekend to work at the job I had since high school. I would drive directly from campus after my last class on Friday to my job. After my shift was done, I'd go back to my parents' house, which was out in the middle of nowhere. My parents weren't yet home when I got back from work. They often spent their Friday and Saturday evenings drinking, like they were the ones in college. So the house was dark, and since it was mid-fall, so was the yard, except for that one yard light. I pulled into my normal parking spot, got out of the car, and then turned to open the back door of my car and get my backpack out of the back seat. That's when I noticed that the bathroom light was on. Was that light on when I pulled up? It must have been, right? As I was contemplating the light and reaching for my backpack, there was suddenly a very angry looking old woman standing in the window staring at me. She was very pissed off at me, and I knew it. We stood there staring at each other for a good 10 seconds when my parents pulled into the driveway and distracted me from my stare down. By the time I turned back, the light was still on, but the woman was gone. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either side, the real creepy ones you see a lot in movies. I had been driving about 45 minutes, and I was starting to get really tired. I knew I wasn't going to last, but I didn't come across any place that I felt I could park and safely sleep. After it became clear to me that I wasn't going to find a place to pull over and my tiredness wasn't going away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass behind some bushes to try and hide my car from anybody else who was going to come past. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22, and then I fell asleep. Some time later, I was awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock. 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and because I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by the same sound, and it was now 12:40. This time, it really freaked me out because the sound didn't stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was just an animal inspecting my car. But why would it return almost an hour after it had left the previous time? I looked in my rearview mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of something running away into the forest. I got the hell out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I came around it, there was a car parked off to the side of the road with the driver's side door open. I slowed down just to look to see if anyone was in there. There wasn't. Then I looked in my rearview mirror. I didn't see anything. And then all of a sudden, this guy comes sprinting around the corner. He starts screaming at me, shouting stuff like,
Hey you! Get out of the car now!
I sped off. I never saw the guy again. I once had to work at a very late shift at the funeral home to prepare a body for a viewing the following morning. I think I finally finished my work around midnight. It was winter, and I ended up getting snowed in at the funeral home that night. I had to stay the night until the plows came early in the morning to plow me out. Let me tell you, it is creepy as hell sleeping in a funeral home, knowing that there are 20 dead people in the basement, especially when you hear constant noises. I'm in college, and I live on a campus in a dorm room. This dorm is very old and community style. I've been living here for 2 months with my roommate, and everything has been fine. In the last week, we've had all of our lights in our room, just our room, go out. We've been trying to put maintenance requests in for the past week, but the website won't allow us to do it for some reason. Last night, I heard my roommate yelling from the hallway that her key wasn't working in the lock and that she needed in now. So I stumbled out of bed and was reaching for the lock on the door when I looked over and saw her asleep in her bed. I backed away from the door to go back to sleep, thinking that it had been a dream. I took a last look at my sleeping roommate and went to turn around to climb into my bed when I saw the shadow under the door. The door is a good inch or two off the ground, so I bent down to see if there was someone standing at our door, or the one across the hall. When I was eye level with the crack, I saw a pair of boots facing the door. Then, the person turned away, and I heard the stairwell door open. I couldn't even turn on the lights, because the bulbs were out, so I crawled into bed with my lamp, and sat there for an hour, because I was freaking out. To get onto the girls' floor, you have to have the student card of someone that lives here. They lock the building up at midnight every night to make sure that only students and guests are inside. We've had problems with homeless people sleeping in the basements of some of our buildings. I was freaking out because the boots at the door were men's boots. I could have swore I heard my roommate's voice. I took care of my mentally handicapped cousin a few years back. She could get around well enough, but due to severe arthritis in her knees and ankles, she had to be watched, helped into the bath, shit like that. I would go into her room in the morning, help her to her walker so she could go to the bathroom, and I would make her breakfast. One morning, I heard the water running in the bathroom when I went in to check on her. I had to pass her room on the way to the bathroom. When I did, I saw that she was in her rocking chair in the corner, her blanket over her head, and she was rocking back and forth. "Don't leave the water on. You're going to flood the place." I went into the bathroom to shut the faucet off, and my cousin was there, washing her face. I immediately ran back to the room, but it was just her blanket crumpled up on the rocking chair. My cousin wanted to know why I undid her bed. I didn't stay too long after that. When I was younger, I used to live by the woods and could see a cemetery from my back porch. One Easter, I remember waking up and seeing the Easter Bunny. I didn't tell anyone, but there was an extra Easter egg in my house that my parents didn't hide. Years later, when I was in high school, I asked my parents if they ever dressed up like the Easter Bunny and came into our room. They said they would never go through so much trouble. Then, my younger sister, who I shared a bunk bed with when this happened, said she remembers when the Easter Bunny came into our room. I was terrified that we both remembered seeing a person dressed as a bunny in our room. To make it even weirder, I told the friends I sat with at lunch what happened. One of the girls was my neighbor across the street. She told me one Easter a long time ago, she looked out her window during the night and saw the Easter Bunny standing in her driveway. It gave me chills. To this day, I am terrified of people who wear that costume. I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room because my sister was a light sleeper and I could stay up until dawn. But of course, I always ended up sleeping on the couch because Nick at night made me tired. One night, I wake up to a strange feeling, like an instinct. I just bolted into a sitting position and stared out the front window. We lived in rural Georgia, so you can imagine the magnitude of trees. In perfect light cast from the moon, I see a silhouette of someone in the tree in front of my house. The family dog dashes to the window and is snarling into the glass. Terrified, I run into my parents' room and try to explain to my parents that there is a strange person outside. My dad grabs something defensive. I tremble in my mom's arms until my dad comes back in and says that he saw no one and he wants me to go to bed. I decide to sleep in my regular bedroom. I tell my sister what happened. Dad is making regular rounds in the house with a cup of coffee. Everything is silent and calm, and I finally think to myself, I can sleep. Nope. I notice the man outside my window. He gives me a hush signal and runs away. He just turns around to run a straight line away. Every bit of this story is true. I grew up playing pool, and going out of town for the weekend to play a tournament was common. My friends and I were in our early 20s and on a tight budget, so we decided to carpool and share a hotel room for the next tournament. We even found a fourth guy, Bert, to ride along with us. I had only met Bert once prior. He was a huge redneck with a wandering eye. Intimidating and drunk might be the best words to describe him. On the 3-hour ride to the tournament, Bert was already drunk and talking crazy shit about his wife. Apparently, they were going through a divorce and he was not happy about it. He eventually starts describing this fight where he has her on the floor with his foot on her neck and then cutting her throat. Everyone in the vehicle was like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? We all make it back home from the tournament, and the following Monday, I get a call. It's the cops. Holy shit. They asked me the strangest questions about Bert. Did he have mud on his shoes? Did he mention his wife? What was his demeanor like on the trip? Weeks later, I would find out what really happened. Bert murdered his wife that Thursday night. The next afternoon, he gets in my car for a road trip. That fight that he described in the car wasn't just some fight. He was describing how he murdered her. I went on a road trip and shared a hotel room with this guy. I had a very frightening night last year. Out of the blue, I live by myself, and late in the night, I got a phone call. My cell phone's volume was down very low, and I couldn't hear it ring while I slept. I woke up for no particular reason about an hour after the call. I grabbed my phone and looked at the screen, and it was a private number. I went back to sleep and thought nothing of it. I woke up again a couple hours later, and I looked on my phone to see that the same number had called 15 more times. That was enough to wake me up completely, and I saw that I had 3 new voicemails from that number. I listened to the first one that was left. A man whispered into the phone,
"I just crawled through the window in your dining room."
That obviously made my hair stand on end, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I sat in bed, terrified, for a few minutes, thinking of what I should do next. I listened to the second voicemail. The man then said into the phone,
"Your bedroom door is locked."
After hearing that, I immediately called 911. I told them somebody was in my house. They proceeded with questions, and I didn't hear a single one. I was so scared. I stayed on the phone with them until 2 officers showed up at my house, and they searched the place. Eventually, I felt comfortable enough to let them leave, and when they did, I listened to the third voicemail. The man whispered into the phone,
"I am hiding in your house."
After hearing that, I got in my car and drove to my sister's house and slept there that night. I didn't return home until the next day with more police officers, my sister, and her husband. The whole place was searched inside and out, and we all found nothing. Not a single sign of forced entry, nothing. Not a single phone call after that night. And I need to tell myself it was just some kid trying to scare me. When I was in high school, you could say I had some mental issues. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I was depressed all the time and thought about killing myself regularly. My parents had me go off to a psychiatric institution for boys. I made friends with boys who were like me. They had similar problems and understood where I was coming from. This one day, a new boy arrived on our block. We all knew very quickly that he was a very special case. On his first day, he attacked another boy with a plastic spoon he had broken. He was put into private isolation, where he received counseling every day, as well as massages to try to keep him calm. At some point, he was free to be around the rest of the boys again, and on the day he was first allowed to join us, he came up behind me when I was drawing and bit the back of my neck. I don't mean he gave me a nibble either. I was rushed to the nurse's station and had to get 23 stitches. I was released from the institution before this boy was, and every day I was there with him, I was terrified. He would look at me often with a hatred in his eyes. All he wanted to do was hurt me and every other boy there. I have no idea what became of him. My father remarried when I was 7 years old. My new stepmother had 3 kids. The youngest, a boy, was just a baby. Her oldest was also a boy, and he was a very nice kid. He was 2 years older than me. Her middle child was my age, and she was a girl. This girl, we'll call her Amy, was extremely troubled. She was a very, very mean child. When we first moved in with them, I would wake up in the middle of the night, and Amy would sometimes be there in the doorway to my room, watching me. I'm not exaggerating. She actually did this, and my dad flipped out when I told him. Amy stopped doing it after she got in trouble, but after a few weeks, one night, I woke up to unbelievable pain. Amy had pushed a thumbtack into my forehead. I screamed and cried, and my dad and Amy's mom came running into the room. Amy got in trouble, of course, but not like she should have. My parents were in denial and figured she was just mad at me, but I told them there was something wrong with her and that nothing had happened and she had no reason to be mad at me and to do something like this. I could tell that my dad knew there was something more that was wrong. I tried telling my dad I thought she should go to a hospital, but at my age, I didn't really know what they were called, just a hospital for people with problems. We lived down a dirt road, and during the weekends, sometimes I was forced to play with Amy. I constantly told her to stop staring at me and to not come near me. I was living in hell. This little girl was crazy. All she talked about was becoming a doctor so she could do surgery, but maybe not good surgery, as she put it. She said it would be fun to cut people's bodies open and fill their cavities and arteries with broken glass and nails. To say I was scared of her would be an understatement. One day, I was playing in my room when she told me to come with her. She wanted to show me something. I followed her down to the creek by our house, and when I got there, I almost fainted. She had brutally killed a bunch of ducks. I ran home and cried. She told me that if I told anybody, she would stick thumbtacks into my head again. My dad and her mom eventually got divorced a couple years later, and it's been many years now. About 5 years ago, I saw on her mom's social media account that she was committed to a mental institution. Surprise, surprise. I was asked to house sit a few years back for my good friend Paul. He and his family were going to Disney World on vacation for 5 days, and he wanted me to stay there and feed their pets, and just make sure everything was cool while they were gone. I was unemployed, and he offered me $200. I really needed the money, so I agreed to do it. The first couple of days were fine, fun, and relaxing as a matter of fact. They had a hot tub that I took advantage of, and their 2 dogs were really awesome. On my 3rd night there, however, things started to get weird. I made a sandwich for dinner and left everything on the counter, or so I thought. About an hour later, I returned to the kitchen counter to grab a beer and put everything away, and I noticed the bread was already put up, and the mustard and mayonnaise were also already back in the fridge. I wasn't positive that I didn't put everything away, but I was pretty sure. I brushed it off and fell asleep watching TV. The next day I woke up and the TV was off. Not just the TV though, all the lights in the room, the TV and the speakers too. I was officially weirded out by this point and thought they might have had a ghost or something. Again I brushed it off. The rest of the day everything was cool. Nothing weird happened. Then, the next day, I went to the store, and when I came back I decided to get back in the hot tub. A while later I got out and realized my towel that I had left hanging on the hook on the deck was gone. I went inside, dripping all over the place, and found my towel in the master bathroom, flung over the side of the shower. I knew for sure I had not put the towel there, and I called Paul to ask him if he was used to weird shit like this happening in his house, and if they might have had a ghost. He told me no, that they hadn't experienced anything weird. He then told me to ask John. I asked who John was, and his answer confused me. He said it was his brother-in-law. I told him his brother-in-law has not come by since I'd been there. His response gave me goosebumps. He said John lives there with us. I was so freaked out that I tuned out everything else he said to me and finally said back to him, "I have not seen him one time. Why would you ask me to house sit if he was here too?" He then said John was disabled and he couldn't drive a car or get around the house easily. After hearing that, I told him again I haven't seen him once and that I was so freaked out I was gonna leave. He tried to keep talking to me, but I hung up and ran to start gathering my clothes and whatnot. I was on edge, and a few minutes later I had all my things and bolted out of that house. Paul called me 2 days later and told me John said he never saw me either. A few years ago, I was home alone at night. I was watching TV in the living room when I heard the doorbell ring. Whenever I hear the doorbell ring, especially when I'm home alone, I am very cautious to answer it. I walked up to the peephole without turning on the porch light, so they don't know if anyone is actually home or not, and I looked through it. It was really dark, but I can see a small figure, more like a black blob. I don't know its definite shape, and had to be around 3 to 4 feet, doing like a dancing motion, dipping down and oscillating its arms outward. Think of a person moving their arms like wings gracefully. It was dark outside, but this figure was darker, so I could see this going on. After a few seconds, I stopped looking through the peephole because it was too freaky to look at. I regained some courage and looked back through it, and whatever it was gone. To this day, I still don't know what that was, and I get freaked out just thinking about it. I'll give you some backstory before I begin. I am 21 years old now, but when this happened, I was only 14. I was home alone. I don't remember why, but I do remember I was on the phone with my friend when downstairs I heard a noise. Confused, I got up from my bed and creaked my bedroom door open. I told my friend to hold on, and I yelled down the stairs, "Guys?" I was assuming I would hear them respond, but I didn't. I didn't hear a thing. I did hear my dog growling downstairs, and thought that's what I must have heard the first time, although it always made me scared when I would hear her growl. It put me on edge. I felt comfort though because my friend was on the phone with me. I went downstairs and turned the corner into the kitchen. As I turned the corner, I saw the door to our basement close. It scared the shit out of me, and I froze where I was standing. My dog was growling outside, looking in at me, and started freaking out when she saw me and started jumping on the glass door. This didn't help and scared me even more. I ran over and let her inside, and she immediately ran to the basement door and started growling at it. That was all I needed to see, and was freaking out to my friend on the phone. I told her I was sure somebody was down there and I was gonna leave. I felt much better when I went outside onto the front lawn and saw my neighbor outside getting his mail. I went over to him, and it was weird because I have never spoke to him until then, and I told him I was sure somebody was in my house. He was very understanding, and he told me to come with him while he grabbed his phone and called my parents. I didn't know he had their number, but I was so glad he did. My mom believed me right away, but my dad took some convincing. I felt bad for ruining their night, but somebody was in our house. I was sure. I sat with my neighbor awkwardly on his front porch, staring at my house. While we waited, I saw the master bedroom light turn on. My neighbor and I flipped out, and he couldn't believe it. When my parents got home, my mom came over to us, and my dad and my neighbor slowly went inside the house. I think they were scared as hell, but neither one said so. They ended up not catching the person, and I was happy, because I was afraid of my dad getting hurt. My dad did say that he thinks he just missed whoever it was, The back door was unlocked the whole time. It was so creepy. I never felt comfortable in that house after that, even when my parents were home. And still I get scared sometimes when I think too much about it. Hey, I'm new to the forum, but I have a really creepy story to share. Around 10 years ago or so, I was working as a pizza delivery driver. I had just turned 18, and it seemed like a good first job for me. So that you can understand the story and my experience better, just know that I am a female, and I'm on the petite side. So I hadn't been working at this pizza place very long before this happened. It was a Saturday night, around 11 o'clock. Why it is okay to have a petite young girl deliver pizzas at this time of night, I have no idea, but I was. I had one delivery to make, at an apartment complex a few miles up our main street. I figured this one would be quick, and I'd probably get a decent tip because I always seem to when delivering to this complex. I went to the apartment number listed on the receipt and knocked. A man answered the door. This man was tall, good looking, with long brown hair that was kept and combed to the side. If I remember correctly, he was wearing blue jeans and a turtleneck long sleeve shirt. When he answered, he seemed very happy to see me. He said hello and told me to hang on for a second and kinda closed the door in my face. I assumed he was getting the money when he opened it back up, and I saw another man now, standing near a bedroom door close by. The man had a big smile and was honestly pretty attractive. He asked me to come inside and set the pizza on the table. I looked at his hands and he wasn't holding any money. I thought this seemed weird, and I didn't trust the situation. I told him I'd just wait here for the payment, and he insisted that I come inside to put the pizza on the table. I told him I was sorry, but I couldn't do that, and he said something like, "It's fine, I'll get your money, just come in and put it down." I told him I didn't feel comfortable entering people's houses and that it was against our policy anyway. He then stopped smiling and said, "Just come in." I felt scared now and told him I wasn't going in one last time. He then slammed the door in my face, and it scared me even more. I hurried back to my car and drove back to the store. The guy obviously didn't want the pizza. It was very frightening. I wish I could say I quit after that, but I didn't. And I even delivered pizza to that same complex a few more times before I started another job. Thank God I never saw that man or the other guy that was there again. Do you ever have the feeling when you're walking somewhere at night that the person behind you is following you? That happened to me, and not very long ago either. I was walking home from my friend Nicole's house. She only lived like 7 blocks down from my street, but we live in the downtown area of a huge city. I should have known better, but I do now. I was walking, and I could just feel that somebody was behind me at some point. I'm not sure how. Instinct, I guess. I turned around kinda to see who it was, and it was exactly what you don't want to see. A tall man, wearing dark clothes, with his hands in his hoodie pockets. I started picking up my pace because of the natural nervousness it brought me. I thought for sure he wasn't actually following me, but I started to hear his steps when I couldn't before. I turned again and saw that he was walking really fast behind me now, about 30 feet away. I became scared and paranoid and thought, should I actually start running? And after I heard his steps become much faster, I realized he had started running. So I did too. I turned around while running to see him full on sprinting at me. This damn near gave me heart failure. I ran faster and faster. He wasn't gaining speed on me, and I saw the sign of a liquor store fairly close. I heard his steps start to fade as I got closer to it, and I ran inside and up to the counter where the very concerned man that was working there was looking at me. I told him I was sorry, but I thought somebody was following me. I looked out the door, and the man never passed by. I called my boyfriend and told him what just happened to me, and he was pissed. He said he would come get me, and I stood there telling the man at the counter about it too. My boyfriend came in and he said nobody was outside the store. That proved to me that the guy was actually chasing me. I was remodeling a house about a year back, down in Memphis. This couple that had hired me on had money, and they were expecting a baby when I first met them. The wife was pretty far along, and it turned out she went into labor only about a week into my work there. I showed up for work the morning after they had gone to the hospital, and the husband left me the key and told me to help myself to anything in their refrigerator, and they probably wouldn't be home for a couple days. So I was putting up drywall in their family room, listening to music. I was trying to keep busy when suddenly I heard something. It sounded like somebody hit a drum. I set the stuff I was holding down and turned down my radio. I didn't hear anything anymore, so I walked over to the foyer and peered down the hallway that led to the master bedroom. I'm not shy, so I hollered out, "Hello?" I got nothing back. Then I heard a door close down the hall. I was looking down the hall when I heard it, and to me it sounded like the door to the master bathroom had opened up. I said hello. Again I heard nothing. I went back to work, but only a few minutes later I was holding a full sheet of drywall, about to drill it up, when out of the corner of my eye I saw someone. I turned, but they had vanished. I heard them run down the hall. I pretty much dropped what I was holding and said hello again. I was breathing heavy now because I saw a person in the corner of my eye. I was certain. I walked over to the hallway again and looked down. I saw no one and heard nothing. I looked at my watch and it was 6:19. I told myself I was good for the day and walked back over to where I was working. I plugged in my drill charger and slid a battery into it, and I grabbed my keys on the counter and walked outside. I came back to their house the next morning and continued working. Before I did though, I walked down the hallway and checked the rooms. Nobody was there but me. Later on, I asked the husband when they got home who that might have been, and he said he had no idea, that nobody lived there but them. I'm certain I saw somebody in that house. So my wife and I were celebrating 5 years of marriage. We were staying in this nice hotel in Santa Cruz called the Dream Inn. It was September, so it wasn't too hot outside, and not cold either. It was perfect. One night we got back to our hotel from dinner. My wife got in the shower, and I was sitting on the balcony overlooking the ocean. I was drinking a beer and just enjoying the scenery. It was really cool. I could see the ocean from there, the wharf, and the boardwalk. As I was sitting there, a man walked over, and from underneath me he said, "Hey, your wife is gorgeous, sir. You better keep your eye on her." I took offense to this asshole approaching me and saying this, so I just said nothing back. He walked off, and I forgot about it. The next day we were walking along the wharf and saw a nice restaurant we wanted to eat lunch at. We went inside and sat down. I noticed soon after that one of the waiters was being creepy and kept making a point to look over to us as he walked by. My heart skipped a beat when I realized that the waiter was the same guy that was under my balcony the night before. I stared him down and he just smiled at me. It really angered me and, quite frankly, scared me. I told my wife about it and she agreed that we should eat somewhere else. We were only there for one more day, and I didn't see that asshole again. But man, that was creepy. That guy must have been on a lunch break or something and followed us. I have no idea. Hey there. I have to share this with you guys. I think this story would qualify to be on here. I work for a pest management company. I want to remain anonymous and don't want to name my company, but it's a pretty big one in the US. I'm a termite guy, which means I do the really tough work. I have to crawl under houses and spray termite killer on the wooden beams that hold up the house, as well as drill holes in concrete and dig ditches along the perimeter of houses. Not too many scary things can happen, I guess, while doing this job. It's really tough work, but this one day, like 6 months back, I had the surprise of a lifetime. I was working at this really old, run-down place up in the hills in my state, and the woman who lived at the house was really nice. She was an older broad and just wanted her house saved before the termites literally ate the whole thing. So everything was going as it would normally, and I was going under the house in the crawl space to spray. As I was crawling though, I smelled something really foul. I thought to myself, this smells like nothing I've ever smelled, but it was really strong. Not strong enough to stop me though, or make me puke or anything, but man, I tell you, it was bad. I was crawling, spraying, and trying not to breathe too much because of the smell. As I crawled, I ran into a body. It was almost completely rotted, but there was still flesh I could see. It felt surreal, honestly. I couldn't believe I had stumbled onto it. It felt like winning the lottery of stumbling onto something so weird. The body was obviously put there, and I became aware that the nice woman I was working for might have committed murder and put this body there. From what I could tell, it was an adult, but I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. I actually called my boss from under the house, and he told me to get out right away and tell the homeowner. I got all detective on him and said I shouldn't tell her, and maybe our company should just call the cops. He said no and insisted that I tell her right then. I did, and she was shocked, asking if I was sure and all that. I told her I was pretty damn sure I had just found a rotting corpse under her house, and she called 911. I left the house without finishing my work, of course, and I wasn't able to find out if she had done it or what the hell the deal was with it all. I looked online, but never found a thing. Sometimes I feel like driving up there to see if her SUV is still parked there. It honestly wasn't too scary after it set in, but when I first saw the corpse, I swear it looked like the skeleton was looking right at me. I work at a pizza joint in Chicago, and I unfortunately have the shitty responsibility of delivering pizzas, usually on the weekends, and usually at night. I've asked my boss for day shifts, but she seems to ignore my requests and give me whatever shifts I don't want the most. I know being a pizza delivery man is somewhat of a dangerous job, but I never imagined anything like what happened to me a few months ago could actually happen. There is this one customer that always calls in and acts strange as hell on the phone. Sometimes he will just hang up on you. Sometimes he'll order pizzas normally, but make crazy sounds while he does, and then hang up. We've always thought this guy was just an idiot playing pranks. He would make really weird comments too, like, "I want to order a large pizza with pineapples, mustard, and your skin." I'll never forget that one. We usually just hang up on his ass now, and we always know it's him calling because his number is saved in our system. So he called again a few months ago and ordered a pizza normally. No bullshit, no weird comments or sounds, and gave his address too. I thought it would be interesting to finally deliver to this guy, and when I drove up to his house, it was something you'd see in a scary movie. An old as hell looking place right on the line where we don't deliver. Not in the busy part of the city where most of our orders come in. The house looked like it was about 100 years old, and there were no lights on that I could see. I wasn't scared or anything, just looking forward to seeing what he looked like. When I went to the front door, I rang the bell, but it wasn't working, so I knocked. I realized I forgot the guy's soda, and thought he'd give me shit for sure, or just freak out on me. Nobody answered right away, so I knocked again on this big door. He opened up after that second time. He was wearing this weird-looking mask around his mouth. Only his mouth. His eyes were opened wide, and I told him how much the pizza was, and that I was sorry I forgot the drink. He looked down, I think, and then said it's okay, and then looked at me again. I stood there looking at him for like 5 seconds in silence when I got bored of his shit and told him the amount again. He said okay, and then asked me, "Has anyone ever attacked me before?" I told him no, and if they did, they'd be sorry. He then took off his mask that was covering his mouth, and he had big-ass scars all around his mouth. I have no idea what they were from, and can't even imagine what they might have been from, but he looked seriously messed up. He smiled at me and his lips were all cracked. I noticed he wasn't about to hand me some money, so I told him I was leaving. I turned around and started walking down the steps, and he screamed at me and slammed the door. This bastard was crazy, and I don't think any of his shit was to be funny. That final scream he gave me was creepy as hell, even though I kind of expected him to do something like that. He has called several times since then, and we always just tell him now that he is on our no delivery list. He usually just screams and hangs up, or cusses out whoever is on the phone. Hello. I want to share a scary story that happened to me when I was 10 years old. It happened at my house in the middle of the night. I woke up to get some water, as I usually did. I walked out of my bedroom and went down the stairs. My house was 2 stories, but really it was 3 if you count the set of stairs you have to climb to reach the front door and the back door. So this was my usual routine. I would wake up somewhere around 2 a.m. and go downstairs to get water. I would stand in the kitchen and drink while looking out the back window and down at our backyard. I always did this and would imagine how scary it would be if I saw somebody back there. This one night, I did see someone back there. As I was drinking my water, I saw a figure standing against the fence in the back of the yard. I didn't know what they were doing or if they were looking at me, but they were dressed in all black. I stood there frozen with fear until the person started moving. They started walking nonchalantly across my backyard. It was terrifying to see. They were walking over to the wooden steps to get to the back door. I ducked down and ran back up the stairs as fast as I could. I tried opening my dad's bedroom door, but it was locked. I knocked and knocked. It took forever for him to finally say, "Yeah." I tried whispering that somebody was in our backyard, but also loud enough to where he could hear me. Nothing happened, so I repeated myself a little bit louder. He finally opened the door and I started crying. I told him I saw a person in our backyard. He told me to go in his room, and I did, while he went down the stairs. I waited for a minute and couldn't handle it, so I left his room and slowly started going down the stairs again. Before I could reach the bottom, he turned the corner and scared me, saying nobody was back there. I told him I saw somebody for sure walking towards the door, and he went back over to the kitchen to look out the window. We both looked out and saw nothing, saw nobody. After him asking me numerous times if I was sure, he called the police. They arrived pretty fast, and they checked our backyard, the front yard, everywhere, but didn't find anyone. We went back to sleep and nothing else happened. For some reason, the person didn't try to enter our house. I'll never forget seeing that person back there though, and I still can't look out my windows at night. I was home alone one night when I was a teen. Everything was fine until I woke up in the middle of the night to get some water. I walked out of my room, down the stairs, and as soon as I hit the bottom landing, I saw that there was a figure sitting in the old chair in our living room. I stood there for a few seconds, completely in shock and terror. The person sitting there began to move and stand up. I turned and fled back up the stairs. I ran back into my room and slammed and locked my door. Completely in tears, I sat on my bed in the dark, staring at the door. My dad appeared at my door not 10 seconds after I closed it and asked why I just slammed my door and what was going on. I opened up for him, and in between my sobs, I told him I saw somebody downstairs. I asked if it was him, and he said no, that he had just come from his bedroom right next to mine. It was just the two of us living there. He checked the house and found nobody except an old-looking business card for this hotel in our city. It was tucked between the cushions of the chair. He checked into it, but nothing became of it to my knowledge. It was the scariest night of my life. This happened on a Friday. I was in high school, and I had just walked home after school. I walked into my house, and my parents weren't home yet. This was typical. They got off work at 5, and I was always home alone for a couple hours after school. I was sitting in my bedroom, watching TV. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, and my bedroom door was open. As I was watching, someone walked by my bedroom very fast and scared the living shit out of me. I'm an only child, and I knew that whoever had just walked by was not supposed to be in my house. I got up and thought about jumping out of my bedroom window. I was very creeped out and decided that was probably the best idea. I opened my window and crawled out. Luckily, my bedroom was on the first floor, and when I hit the grass, I turned around and looked up at my window, mortified that I'd see somebody standing there, or somebody about to jump out after me. Relief. Nobody was there. I ran to the gate, and the damned lock was so old and rusted, it made so much noise trying to undo the damned thing to open it. I got it open after making so much noise and ran to the street and started going down the sidewalk. I stopped, and my heart sank when I realized I had changed my pants into gym shorts when I got home, and my cell phone was still in my jeans pocket. There was no way I was going back inside, but I did start walking back toward my house, and when I reached it, I stopped and tried to see somebody through my front window. Of course, I didn't. I walked up to my front door and very quietly opened it. It creaked open very slowly, and as soon as the door stopped, after hitting the closet door behind it, I heard somebody say, "Get out." I sprinted away and called my dad at the grocery store that was kind of close to our house. He came to the store to pick me up, and I told him we should call the cops, but he wasn't afraid, and he just walked right into the house when we got home. Nobody was in there, and he assured me that he checked everywhere. I only went inside when he said he was 100% sure there was nobody inside the house. Early the next morning, I woke up because my bedroom was freezing. I sat up, and my window was wide open. It was winter, and there was no way in hell I would leave it open the way it was. I told my dad, but he of course didn't really believe me. My mom seemed a bit creeped out because she could see how serious I was. Whoever had walked by my bedroom was still in there. They were in my room while I slept. When I was 24 years old, I experienced something so strange, so scary, that I just had to write about it and share it with the world. It is absolutely true and was the scariest thing that has ever happened in my life. I was traveling at the time, going to visit my best friend who had moved a few states away from me to go to college. One day, I was driving in Ohio, if I remember correctly. I was on a long highway that stretched across the state when out of nowhere my car died. I shifted to the side of the road where I eventually came to a stop. I didn't run out of gas. I had just filled up at the last town. I tried starting my car, and I was very happy when it actually started. I was confused and was worried about why the hell it just died on me. As I started to pick up speed and get back on track, my car started making weird noises, and it sounded like something was grinding on something else. I looked up and saw a sign that showed that there was a gas station and food at the next exit. My car was moving, but with this grinding noise, I decided to get off the highway and take a look at it at the gas station. There were only 2 places off this exit that I could see: a gas station with 1 pump and an old-looking diner not too far off next to it. I pulled into the gas station and it looked closed. I checked my watch and quickly realized this was strange as hell. It was only 2:30 p.m. What kind of gas station closes before this time? I got out of my car and approached the glass door entrance to the station. I put my hands up and cupped the glass around my eyes to see inside. The place looked abandoned. It was obvious nobody was there, and I turned and looked around me. I felt a bit uneasy at this moment when I saw that no other people or cars were around me. What the hell? Where am I? I checked my phone and of course, I had no service. I looked up at the sky and it was white. The clouds were moving fiercely and it was cold as hell outside. I decided to get back in my car and drive it over to the diner. When I reached this place, I thought for sure it was closed as well. But to my surprise, before I could even reach the door after getting out of my car, an old woman opened the door to the place and greeted me with a smile. She looked nice, and I was so relieved to see somebody else and maybe get some hot food in my stomach. She said hello and asked if it was just me, did I want a booth, blah blah blah. I told her yes, it was only me, and a booth sounded fine. This diner looked very old-fashioned, and there was no other customers inside. The woman showed me to my seat, and I scooted into the booth. I looked up at her, and she was wearing an old apron with stains all over it. Her teeth were old, cracked, and yellow. She had a pleasant voice though, and she seemed to be a very nice person. She handed me a menu and asked what I'd like to drink. I told her a Coke or Pepsi would be great, and she smiled and said she'd be right back. I sat there looking at this menu, and there was dirt on it. It looked like it had been sitting outside for years. I cleaned it off, and the food that was on it that was available was very basic. Burger, chicken sandwich, fries, salad. That was pretty much it. I decided to order the burger with some fries. A few minutes passed, and she hadn't returned with my drink yet. I was anxious to ask her if there was a mechanic around that could look at my car. A few more minutes passed, and I started thinking, what the hell is going on back there? I yelled out, "Hello?" in as nice a voice as possible. I got no response. At this point, I was annoyed, and I got up. I walked over to the door that led into the back cooking area and swung it open, about to ask where my drink was. To my surprise, the back of the diner was empty. There was no cooks, no fryers, no grills, nothing. The woman was nowhere in sight. It was obvious that this diner was not a running establishment, and I felt sick to my stomach. I started to walk into the back area when I heard the scariest, most evil old lady laugh I've ever heard. I stopped and backed up out the door into the front. I turned and walked out the door I came in from. I ran down the 3 steps and over to my car and got inside. Thank God my car started and I floored it out of there. As I was driving away, I looked into my rearview mirror and saw the woman standing in the middle of the road. I spent the night at my girlfriend's house one night and had to leave really early in the morning to go to work. So early, it was still dark outside when I left, and would be for a few more hours. She lived in a rural town about 60 miles from my house and work, and when I got in my car and started driving, there wasn't the usual street lights lining the roads to guide me. The only light came from my headlights. About 10 miles into my drive, my car started to slow down and eventually came to a stop. I first checked my gas, and it was almost full. I'm not very car trouble savvy, so I dug my phone out of my jacket pocket and swiped the screen. Nothing happened. I realized that my phone was dead, and immediately after that, I came to the realization that I had forgot to plug it in last night before we went to sleep. So here I was, stuck in my car, on the side of a rural street, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. I started thinking of things to do. I could start walking. No. Bad idea. It was dark as hell out here, and I wouldn't be able to see anything while walking. And on top of that, somebody could hit me. I concluded the only thing I could do was sit in my car and wait for daylight, which is a very stressful and scary thing to have to come to terms with. It was winter, and I started getting cold. I tried starting my car over and over, to no avail. I gave up and crossed my arms. I sat in the dark car, on the dark street, for about 10 minutes just looking into the darkness in front of me, before I squinted my eyes and noticed somebody walking toward my car directly in front of me. They were about 30 yards away. The only thing I could see was the outline of their body. They stopped walking right after I noticed them. I got really scared and just gazed at this outline for the longest time. In a sudden movement, they started walking again, but fast. In a few seconds, they reached my driver's side door and tried opening it. Did they think the car was empty? Holy hell, did they see me in here? I leaned away from the door and window, onto the center console. After failing to open my locked door, they stood there for a moment, and then very suddenly turned and walked away in the direction they came from. I was so confused and creeped out at this. Why would they walk back that way, the way they came? I sat there in the dark wondering what just happened, when all of a sudden, I saw 2 headlights come on in front of me. The car was parked on the same side of the road as mine, but facing me. Had the person stopped when they saw my car? What would they do next? How did I not see them stop there? After a few moments, they started their engine and turned their car around, driving off down the road. A few hours later, the sun was rising, and a truck stopped next to me and asked if I was having trouble. I asked if I could use their cell phone, and with it, I called my girlfriend, who picked me up soon after.
I met a college girl that I was living with in a defunct fraternity house. They had lost their charter for reasons I didn't first know. We fell for each other, and I moved in with her. It was a great apartment complex with pool tables and giant showers. One night when we were drunk, she took me to a room that was empty. It had 2 bunk beds, and above one bed was a secret door. It led to an upstairs room where most of the hazing took place. The story goes that one night during a party, in the dead of winter, a girl was raped by some frat boys. They just left her up there in the cold, and she ended up dying from freezing to death. One of the frat boys was so distraught by the incident that he went up there one day and painted her picture on the wall, then hung himself from the rafters. Whilst we were up there, I could swear that the eyes on the picture would follow you around the room, and there were reports of crying coming from up there some nights. I never went up there again. This happened ages ago, when I used to babysit. I was maybe 13 at the time, living in the countryside, and was babysitting most of the children on my street, which was around 20 houses. This particular neighbour would love to go out on Wednesday, because there would always be this Latin dance class that was going on in a nearby bar. So I was used to babysitting for her and knew that she'd always come back very late. That specific night, the oldest of the three was a little difficult and didn't want to go to sleep. I struggled putting him into bed, and afterwards was quite tired. I studied my maths a little, and around midnight decided to take a nap until the kid's mum came back. A few minutes after falling asleep, I hear someone frantically knocking on the door trying to open it. It was the neighbour with her 2 young children. It was winter and we easily had 3 feet of snow and temperatures outside that must have been around -21 degrees C or -5 Fahrenheit. The kids only had their pyjamas on and an unzipped jacket. She was wearing jeans, a wool shirt and winter boots. I could see genuine fear in her eyes as I struggled unlocking the door. I panicked and had her walk all the way around the house to the patio door. When she got in, she quickly told me to bring all the children downstairs and turn off all the lights, and to not answer the door to anyone. The kids kept asking, "Who is Daddy going to kill? Who is Daddy going to kill?" And she kept muting and saying nothing was going to happen, and then she left. I woke all the kids up and brought them into the playroom in the basement and asked them to play silently. The oldest, who hadn't been asleep for very long, was asking what was going on, and I kept telling him it was a special occasion where he could come and play late with his neighbour's friends. I calmed down the 2 other children, telling them that no one was going to die. But in my mind, my time had come. I could see myself being shot whilst trying to protect these children. I was trying to figure out how to stay alive, or at the very least how to keep them alive. I wasn't trying to be a hero, but I was trying to convince myself that if it came down to that, I would have to try and protect them. I called 911, but started shaking and crying so much I didn't know what to do. It was an answering machine asking if I wanted the cops or an ambulance or firefighters. I called my mum, quickly told her what was going on, and she called the cops and joined me. As she got in the driveway, the neighbour's husband was walking up the street with a huge axe. My mum got into the house, locked the door and cracked open a window, and asked what was going on whilst he approached the house. He asked her to come out and confront him, thinking it was his wife. My mother then explained to him that she was the babysitter's mother and came after getting a worried 13-year-old's call. He then asked us to give him his wife, but we didn't know where she was. He argued a little with my mum, but she was so calm it calmed him down. I still admire her for that night. After about 15 minutes of arguing, he walked back home carrying his axe, and a few seconds later, his wife knocked on the patio door behind the house and came in. She was crying and apologizing to my mother for the whole situation. She thought her neighbor was home, not the babysitter. My mother asked me to go check on the kids while she was taking care of the wife. A few minutes later, 2 police cars arrived and they came in and spent time with the wife asking tons of questions. Then me, and then my mother. In the meantime, the woman I was babysitting for arrived and they interviewed her as well. They asked me and my mother if we were ready to go to court if the woman pressed charges against her husband, But surprisingly, she never did. Turns out that she had just announced to her firefighter husband that she was sleeping with her boss in order to get a raise because they were struggling financially. He got his firefighting axe and said that he was going to kill the bastard, but she wanted to stop him. That's why she brought the kids and left. I was always scared of him after that, and whenever I saw his children, I would check if they had any signs of violence. But they moved around 6 months later, and we moved 2 years after. I went to a high school that was built maybe 200 to 300 years ago. Me and my friends noticed these hatches that were about 6 feet off the floor next to the toilets. For context, the school was based around a quad, so there was a toilet down some stairs at each corner of the quad. Obviously we had to check these hatches out, so we did it during a drama lesson that we snuck out of. We got in there, and there was a corridor under the actual corridor, which was only about 5 to 4 feet tall, so we had to crawl through it. The corridor connected all the toilets, and there were vents on the top of the walls that were the skirting board level in the classroom, so we could watch lessons going on, which was pretty cool. There were tons of pipes and electrical wires, and other non-interesting shit you would expect, apart from in one corner of the quad though. The hatch for this one was locked from the inside. It looked like the pipes had all gone back into the wall, or stopped so that the wall was bare concrete slab, rather than bricks, which was odd. There was a small gap at the bottom of the wall that I could only just fit through. It was a struggle crawling under as we had our mobiles for torches, and I'm not the smallest of people. When we got through, it felt so much colder in this opening than it did in the corridor. The space was also much more spacious, and we could actually stand up. And also, the lights from our torches didn't light up the opposite side of the room. When we shone them over there, it was as if they weren't even turned on. The room smelled really bad, and I saw what looked like a decomposed cat, which was now just mostly bone and fur, at the side next to the wall closest to us. Freakier still though, there was a stone arch above where the cat was, with some red writing that I think was blood. It was a few years ago, but I vaguely remember it saying something along the lines of, "If you are found here, the school will expel you, but Lucifer shall do much worse." There were a few scratches in the wall, and some symbols that we thought were letters, but we couldn't make them out. We instantly got the hell out of there, because we were shitting bricks at this point. It was a fairly prestigious school, so expulsion was probably the scariest thing that could happen to us. Nonetheless, we never ventured to that room again. I worked at a hospital, doing transport for a couple of years. The transport home base was in the basement of a hospital, where all the laundry was done, as well as supplies being sorted there. I hated working there, since after the incident I'm about to tell you. On this particular night, I was the only one in the basement when I heard whistling at the end of the hallway by the elevator. I poked my head around the corner, fully expecting to see my only co-worker on duty that night. But there was absolutely no one there. I shrugged it off. I'm not easily spooked, and nights are always slow. So I sat back, chilled in the break room for a little while and ate some snacks. Next thing I know though, I hear a loud bang. I walked into the hallway and a bed, was rolling down the hall, bumping into the sides. It was very creepy, and at this point I seriously think my coworker is trying to bullshit me. So I radio him and ask him where he is. He tells me that he's in the cafeteria on the top floor of the building. I still don't believe him. He must be playing a joke, and I'm convinced I will catch him in the act. A few minutes later, I walk past the laundry room, and the moment I pass, I hear the machine start up. I poke my head in, and I don't see him at all in that room. I've got to admit, I was starting to get a little nervous. So then I walk into the laundry room, and the moment that both my feet step foot in there, all the machines simultaneously stop. I freeze, and then run out and head towards the elevator, and that's when I hear the whistling again. At this point, I know I am the only worker in the basement. As I am standing there waiting for the elevator, things start falling off the shelf down the hall. Boxes of gloves, tissues, packages of tubes. I am literally standing there and watching them all fall off one by one at the opposite end of the hallway. I shit you not. My entire body broke out in goosebumps. My hair stood on the end, and I had a strong gut feeling that I was being watched. I know I was not alone. As I'm getting onto the elevator, I feel what feels like someone brushing my arm. I went upstairs and found my co-worker still in the cafeteria. I freaked out to him and got out of there as quickly as I could, and transferred soon after that. The creepy thing to add to it all is that I whistle mindlessly to myself whilst I'm working, and it's almost as if the spirit that was there was trying to mimic me. Creepiest feeling ever. My family used to own and run a real estate office. My grandfather owned it and was the boss, and my mother managed the rent roll and the clients. I worked there on weekends as a teenager. We worked in a very multicultural area, which I always loved, and there was always a reasonable Maui Islander community there, and a lot of whom were very religious. In one particular property we managed, there was this one family who had 2 sons. One of them played football with my younger brother, and the other is the subject of this incident. So this kid was 11, I think, and according to the family, was beginning to act strangely. He would have violent outbursts and say terrible, terrible things. Apparently he was seriously out of control, and the family called their Baptist minister and asked what they should do. Was there even anything that they could do? The minister told them that he was free one evening later that week, and that he would bring the things needed for a baptism. He said that he would perform an exorcism for them. As a good spiritual leader, good religious people, and a baptism could oust an evil spirit. The evening arrived, and the minister got all set up. He got into this deep tub that they all filled with water for the baptism. He chose some passages from the Bible that would help with the exorcism, and got the whole family together around to support and pray. Now, Islander families tend to be large. There were aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents. Everyone was there and willing to help this child. The parents are instructed to bring out the kid, so the father goes to get him. But the kid was an absolute catastrophe. He was described as being like the Tasmanian devil from the cartoons, just all over the place. His dad put the boy over his shoulders and brought him down to where everyone was standing. the kid fighting every step, but with his father being an absolutely enormous man, he didn't stand a chance. The minister said for everyone to gather around and put their hands on the child and pray for him. The father held him in the middle of the family group, and everyone reached out their hands to touch the boy who was thrashing around like a wild thing. What I heard was that it seemed like the boy was totally out of control. Time comes for the minister to say whatever he said, and then for them to get him into the tub for the baptism, which was supposed to expel the demon they figured was possessing him. The father and uncle or something were the ones who got him in the tub, and the family stood around praying their hearts out. But the boy tried to escape the second his body hit the water. He put up a crazy fight, and more family members came in to get him into the water. Finally, they got him in, and were able to hold him there, and hold him, and hold him, and hold him. They didn't mean to do it, but they drowned him. He was an 11-year-old boy on the cusp of puberty. Of course his behavior was erratic. Of course his attitude was awful. Of course he thought being held down by his own family. What did they think was going to happen? The parents, uncle and minister all got arrested. The uncle got off as an accessory charge. The parents got 10 years but were out sooner, and the minister got 15, and was in for the whole time because he was the leader. He should have known better. My mum had to go back and talk to the police and be a character witness about the family and the property and whatnot. Obviously, as we didn't know them all that well, we can hardly talk about the kid and whether he was possessed or not. But I can tell you that it was probably the saddest thing I've ever heard. And even if he was possessed, he didn't deserve for that to happen to him. This story takes place in August of 2013, in the mountains of South Oregon. I am a USAF Security Forces airman, in other words, a military policeman. My girlfriend was at work, and as a swelteringly hot day began to turn into thunderstorms, my buddy Nick and I decided to go exploring some back roads and get out of the heat in town. South Oregon is crisscrossed with logging roads, some actively used and many totally forgotten and grown over. Nick and I spent many of our days searching on roads that we knew, finding roads that we did not, and driving for hours into the mountains, eventually navigating back to paved roads. On this particular day, with storm clouds building over the mountains, we set off on a road that we'd never been on before and began the drive into the mountains. After driving for about an hour, we hadn't seen nor heard any signs of any other people in the woods. We rounded a bend into the thick fir woods and emerged into a meadow that was totally surrounded by thick aspen groves. The meadow was perfectly flat and eerily still. We both noticed the strange stillness almost immediately. No birds, hardly any insect noises, no squirrels, and certainly no other people. On the far side of the meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a picnic table. The table was very odd, however. It was painted a bright orange and was much larger than a typical picnic table in a park. Remarking on this, Nick drove through the meadow to get a closer look. I remember being apprehensive as we approached. The whole scenario was exceptionally strange. The overall silence of the aspen grove was unsettling. Also, It was nearly impossible to see far into the trees as aspens grow extremely close together. When we parked by the table, I hopped out the passenger seat of the truck to check it out. I'm not very tall, only about 5'5", but regardless, the table was ridiculously oversized and practically unusable. The seats were nearly at chest level, meaning I would have to climb up to even sit on them. As I was looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and I noticed that he was looking back into the aspens. At first, I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I noticed a splash of colour that was completely out of place in the thick trees. A small, one-man tent was set back in the trees, about 50 feet away from this strange table. I had an initial feeling of dread hit me, and felt certain that there was someone in that tent, and if we could see the tent, they could undoubtedly see us. There were no campgrounds in the area, no people, no main roads for miles. Surely someone camping so remote would be, well, at the very least, a strange person. However, as we observed the tent, we didn't see any movement, nor hear any strange sounds coming from it. Nick suggested that I call out. I didn't want to, but I did. "Hey, anyone in there?" There was no reply. Feeling completely on edge, Nick and I thought about driving away and leaving this strange area. But we began to fear the worst. What if there was a body in that tent? What if somebody had gotten kidnapped? Foolish, I know, but we thought it just the same. After some debate, we decided to have Nick turn the truck around to drive away from the campsite, should there be any need to leave in a hurry. He would be waiting at the wheel, my heart pounding. I started walking through the trees towards the tent. I was totally keyed up, with my senses on full alert. When I reached the campsite, several things struck me as odd. Backpacks were scattered all over. No fire had been built, and no wood collected. The tent, oh the tent, it was literally full of backpacks and women's clothing. Full of dread, I turned to leave to tell Nick what I had seen. As soon as I left, I heard Nick begin to yell, "Let's go, let's get out of here!" Not knowing what he was yelling about, I ran back to the truck. When I broke out of the trees, I saw a beat-up old Ford Taurus on the road, blocking us from leaving the meadow. I immediately leapt into the passenger seat, and Nick floored the gas pedal. The car was occupied by 2 men, and the third person was laying against the window of the back seat. As we drove across the meadow, the driver attempted to block us from the road, but Nick drove around them and accelerated the way that we'd come from. I looked back and saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road. Nick drove like a madman, and though I was honestly terrified that they would catch up, we hit the highway without seeing the car again. I still don't know if the person in the back was male or female. I called the state police and they promised to send a trooper out to check the scene. I received a call the next day from the trooper, stating that the campsite and the backpacks and all the women's clothing was gone, though he could tell that people had been in the area. The strange table was still by the thick aspen grove, and I have not returned to the area, and do not have any intention of doing so again.